Okay, so when you think about it, changing garments is as important as anything else. And God uses throughout the scripture these indicators, okay? The symbolic power of clothing is indisputable, okay? And so when people change their clothes or when something major happens, clothing is always brought up. Now, obviously, it could be dress clothes. It could be kingly attire. But today, I'm in boots and jeans. And I'm talking about work clothes or war clothes and the authoritative nature. So it's interesting to me that when these world leaders, especially in the G7, all of them, okay, they all to a degree kind of follow this template. You dress a certain way, conservative, rather bland, rather, austere, and then they'll be in negotiations and they'll come out like, in cowboy boots and a pair of jeans because they're going to the mat over this. They're going to get something done today. I'll tell you something else that's interesting is watch on the campaign. They'll take their tie off or they'll roll up their sleeves. And so you see it all the time in the Canadian presentation of Justin Trudeau, when he's really trying to show his bluster, he's really going to get something done. He rolls his sleeves up. You're like, what's that going to do? It's telegraphing a message. It's communicating. And so if he dresses casual, everybody around him dresses casual. If all these presidents that are going to their ranch or wherever they go, they dress casual, everybody else dresses casual. Why? Because it's a part of alignment. It's a part of community. And one of the most, I hate it. One of the worst feelings is to be overdressed. You're like, hey, we're going to go somewhere. If I have a plausible excuse for why I'm coming from the office or coming from somewhere and I have a suit on, I'll go anywhere. I've went on walks with my wife down by the river after work, in a suit. I wear a suit to work. And so, no problem. But you get this invite, hey, come to this banquet or this party. And you get there and you're like in jeans and boots and Carhartt jacket and everybody else in tuxedos. You're awkward. You're flimsy communicator all night long because you got the wrong jacket on. And you're like, well, it's not a big deal. Apparently it is. Okay, there's a symbolic power in clothing. Clothes are consciously used to define, present, and reveal, but also to conceal. Okay, we've talked about that, the deceptive nature of it, but it's also used to align yourself, and your identity becomes part of that, okay? So there's two key personalities that I want to talk about, and this is interesting to me because Samuel is there. He's a profound impact on the nation of Israel. And then, of course, Saul is his the first king. So it's so interesting to me how in 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse number 26, and Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected you from being king. And as Samuel turned about to go away, he laid hold on the skirt or the bottom of his mantle, and it tore. And Samuel said unto him, the Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to someone that is better than thou. So it's a bit of a word play there, that Saul in desperation, he clutches, he grasps at straws, he reaches to try to hold back something. I don't have time to go into all that, but it's very interesting. I tweeted about it earlier today when I don't know what to call it. If it's not Twitter, is it a tweet? or is it just an X? It's a post. It's just an X. Whatever. Anyhow, I tweeted about it today, thinking about it, and it was interesting. I got into a side conversation with a friend of mine who brought up some brilliant observations on this. It's so fascinating to me because, like, if you go to the prophet that confronted Jeroboam, that prophet was so righteous and godly. And this is true in all the scenarios, even in David's scenario. David, when his heart was rending, he was righteous, he was repentant, and he would tear his own clothes. Okay? Saul wasn't repentant. He was self-absorbed. You know what self-absorbed people are going to do when they're grieving? They're going to rip somebody else up. Every other king, every other prophet that was righteous, they rent their own clothes. Saul, when he got upset, he tore Samuel's clothes. That is true in every sense. Bitter people, angry, carnal people, they're not going to tear at their own heart. They're not going to mourn for them. They're going to tear something up of yours. Anyhow, that's sidebar. But David's not even in the story yet, and Saul is a interesting view into clothing. Saul's when the Spirit comes on Saul, he strips off his garments and lies unclothed, prophesying. And the people asked, "Is he also among the prophets?" Saul and David cut Saul's garment, but didn't hurt Saul. Saul's garment was taken from him, his cloak, in death with the crown, and David wouldn't wear it, but he wore the crown. So Saul, there's a lot of shifts in the narrative around clothing and Saul. Okay, so 1 Samuel chapter 17 is the famous story. The one I want to focus on is David and Goliath. And so David comes, and he's a shepherd, and I don't know if he's a boy or not. He's a young man. And he comes to the battle to see how his brothers are doing, brings them some lunch. And he gets there, here's this Philistinian barbarian yelling, and he says, "Who is this man, this uncircumcised Philistine, screaming against God? I'll take him." And so Saul gets him and takes him in the tent. It's a famous, famous story. 1 Samuel chapter 37 or chapter 17 and verse 37, 38, and 9. David comes in and he says, I'll go in and I'll do this, and the Lord will deliver him. He delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." And Saul armed David with his armor. He put on the helmet of brass upon his head, and he armed him with a coat of mail. David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, or was started off, and he had not. And then he said, "Nope, I'm not doing it," because he had not proved it. David said, "I cannot go with these. I have not proved them." And David put them off. Okay? So David won't wear Saul's armor. Now, Saul's armor was custom. It was huge. And we could say, well, it doesn't fit. Okay? But David also chose not to wear his cloak twice. So a cloak is doable. If an armor is too heavy, too big, too whatever, my view is that it symbolized something significantly different that David didn't want to be aligned with. Okay? So as King Saul had the strongest suit of armor of any Israelite, David said, "No, I can't do this. I'm giving it back." Now, scholars who study the nature of clothing and appearance, they look at a person's identity and see both a role embracement or what is called role distancing. So when you take on a uniform, and Russell's book on uniforms is profoundly impacting. And the reason that it's impacting is because it deals with the collective thought process of anybody who dresses in a collective uniform. Okay, so you could be just an average old guy, just never thinking of hurting anybody. You know, kind of the guy that mows the neighbor's sidewalks, lawn or whatever, and shovels their sidewalks. And here's a good guy. All of a sudden, you get in a uniform and you take on the group identity. Okay, now this is interesting to me because I've studied collective thought in uniform and the demand for uniformity. Okay. Why is it that badges and uniforms are an integral part into what a society does? Every society does this, whether it's the military, whether it's the police, whether it's the, I don't know what brigade or what division they are, but anyhow, they put on a uniform and they become something so drastically different than what they are because they're in work clothes, okay? And let's talk about the casual level at first, okay? Your clothes are indicative of your identity, okay? How you dress in a certain way will make you self-project, okay? And so many of individuals do attempt to embrace the identity and role of others, sometimes to their own detriment. They assume the appearance of others, and in doing so, they themselves are essentially changed by just the clothes that they put on. So clothing and changing your clothes can have a drastic effect on individual behavior. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about the Calgary Police Department. I've thought about this a lot. Great, hardy, strong, North American blue blood people. They're good people. Salt of the earth people. I mean, hey, you brave these winters up here, you're salt of the earth. You're not a pixie or a pansy at all. You're a man's man just because you live here. Okay? And I'm sure that if your neighbor was one of these officers, they would be a genuinely easy guy to ride snowmobiles with, probably, I would guess. Probably wouldn't be someone that I would mind standing waist deep in a river fly fishing with. Probably wouldn't be someone that I would be opposed to taking a motorcycle ride with in the summer. But you put this uniform on them, and during the last crackdown, they became something different than who they were. Now, I have read interesting articles about their post-pandemic analyzations of what they did, how they enforced certain things. And it was imperative that by putting on that uniform, they became subjected to an alignment to something they may or may not have even believed in. Things that they may have had an ethical concern about, or they repudiated themselves in other ways. I talked to inspectors that said, we hate this, and opened up to me and talked about their lives and said, you can't even fathom the rock and a hard place we're in. But yet the uniform led them down a path to become and be and do and enforce something that standing in boots and jeans and a toque and a sweater, they probably would have never dreamed in their wildest dreams. But collective uniformity does matter. So it is a proof that when you put on that uniform, you put on that other identity. Okay? So David comes to Saul, and Saul is the quintessential carnal man, the fleshly ruler, head and shoulders, stature, strength, might. All that was intact. David walks to this amazing figure, and he says, put on my uniform, put on my armor, And David said, I can't do this. I haven't proven this. Do you think David really had a problem with the quality of that armor? Do you think David somehow wanted to repudiate the tensile strength of that armor? Do you think he didn't think that it would stop a spear or a sword, or that was the best armor anybody had? It was proven beyond anything else. What David was worried about is the identity. I have an identity, is that the Lord delivers me in this certain way. And if I wear your clothes, I have to identify with an alternative outcome of deliverance. I have to adjust the expectation and the expectation of an outcome. I have to do something different. And David said, that's what I don't want. That's what I don't want to do. So scholars have that study clothing, and it's a lot in Kaiser's book on the social psychology of clothing. And if you wonder where I'm getting a lot of this, I'll be honest with you. A lot of it is coming out of this, the social psychology of clothing. They study role embracement and role distancing. Role embracement refers to the close link between a particular role and the individual's identity. The role is likely to be integrated into one's self-concept, Kaiser writes. On the other hand, role distance to a lack of inner identification with a particular role. Often, in both of these instances, how the person feels wearing particular clothing signifies that the role is crucial, whether it is attainable or whether it is untenable. This is especially the case in the contexts that are novel to that person, when new and different garments are worn. In these cases, self-awareness is usually heightened, as in the case of David attempting to wear Saul's armor makes these concepts extremely clear. Okay? And so you find this throughout history, you find this throughout literature. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, who utilizes clothing to symbolize not only the change of power in Scotland, but also the essential changes in Macbeth, the man himself. As soon as Macbeth had been told that he had been made the Thane of Cawdor, he says, "The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" Macbeth feels totally uncomfortable in another's clothing. Cohen writes, because this clothing is someone else's identity. Macbeth can't hardly wear the Thane of Cawdor's clothing because it assumes an identity that is not Macbeth's. Yet by accepting the new garments, he silently and subsequently accepts the new role, Cohen writes. He also loses himself while taking on the Thane of Cawdor's traits. Macbeth's dressing in borrowed robes affects his change, and he changes into a monstrous murderer. The moment he becomes the wearer, he becomes the thing that wore it. He cannot stop contemplating the killing of Duncan so that he can become king. His entire being is charged and changed. And after killing Duncan, Macbeth rapidly becomes a control and power-hungry madman. He unfortunately, as Shakespeare emphasizes, Macbeth's new title and role never fits him. Shakespeare says his title hangs loose about him like a giant robe upon a dwarfish thief. Macbeth simply doesn't fit properly into his borrowed robes. And while the robe never fits him, the murder seems to. The greed seems to. And though he can't make the clothes fit properly, and he always feels odd in them, he seems to take on the lust for the murder, and it almost seems tailor-made for him. which lets us know that we can wear a uniform or we can wear a garment that we are uncomfortable with, and it will ultimately alter us. It will become our identity. So before I get too deep into this, I'll just ask a few questions. Have we ever undertaken a role or assumed a position that did not match who we are? What made us take that role? Did somehow wearing the uniform or having the title or the name, did it somehow so beautifully align with the wish, the willful wantonness in our hearts, that the clothing, or rather, were we insightful enough to realize that the clothes were not just us? They didn't fit our personalities, our goals, our values. Did we have a sense of role distancing, or did we ignore the fact that the clothes are so alluring that if I put them on, I will become that other person? That's an interesting subject, because if someone is going for a promotion and you say, well, CEO, am I qualified to be that? Management operations, or pastor or evangelist. And we get so enamored with this titular explanation of what it is to be a pastor. And they become enamored with, well, if I could dress like this or have this or speak like that. And it's almost like all the things that really don't matter attract us to the most important roles. And so as someone comes closer to the role, they will either embrace that role or distance themselves from that role. And you will find how they relate with the coverings, the clothing, the titles, is how comfortable they are with that being their identity. Okay, so this is interesting to me, because David says, no thanks. I'm done with that. I don't want to be that. But if you turn the page to 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse number 1, it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking to Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was connected with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as he loved his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his garments, even his sword, and to his bow, and to his belt. Now, David has no objection. Has David proven these? The slingshot meister now is comfortable wearing Jonathan's sword. So is it truly about he hadn't proved the armor? Do you really think that David was not well equipped in the ability of swordmanship? I don't. I don't think that David was clueless in how to wield and handle a sword. I think all young men who were drafted into the military at that time, who was part of that culture, all of them was a part. David had seen his brothers in the military. He was in a military family. What kid doesn't play like that? He grows up, he learns these things. In fact, later on, David became great in battle. He was very well equipped at using a sword. In fact, David multiple times sought out a sword, including at one point, he resurrected Goliath's memory and went behind the curtain and got Goliath's sword. David was a swordsman. David was not a Saul. The power of the story is David wouldn't wear Saul's armor because he didn't want to align himself with Saul. Mark these words. If you're a new believer and you're new to Truth Church, hear me out. When you come out of the world wants you to dress a certain way because it identifies a part of your component inherent makeup. And so that the components of your heart, the components of your spirit, the presentation of who you are, immodest, modest, male, female. It doesn't matter. The world wants it to be one size fits all. They want it to be unisex. They want you to wear whatever men wear and men wear whatever women wear. And let's just dispense with this whole gender differentiation. Why do they do that? Because they're wanting you to assimilate into a role. Your clothes are indicators of the role you are playing. As an apostolic Pentecostal, you are playing a role in this grand stage. You are a Christian. You are a believer. And so you must be careful that when the carnal, when the symbolic of the fleshly materialism, sexy sensuality of this world asks you, here, wear my armor. Remember, you don't get to dress like that unless you're going to assume that identity. Ladies, I'm sorry. I'm going to say something shocking and blunt. And if you're new to Truth Church, just try to think through this. Years ago when I was working, there was a woman that dressed extremely seductive, extremely revealing. I'm not going to go into it all what it was, but she had painted on jeans and she might as well not had any other clothes on. Okay? And guess what she was treated as by all the men that worked there? As something to just stare at. She comes into the break room. I'll never forget this. I was sitting there and she demanded, she said, I am done being treated like a sex symbol. And she looked at me. I was a young man. She knew I was a aspiring minister or trying to be a preacher. And she said, aren't you the Christian? Aren't you the preacher guy? You tell me right now, is it wrong for them to treat me like a sex symbol? And I said, absolutely it is. I said, albeit, it's also wrong for you to dress like a sex symbol. And if you don't want to be treated like a sex symbol, please stop dressing like that. You're dressing and you're assuming an identity. And so the world is offering this sensuality, this hypersexualized context, this forever young, forever 21 line of baloney. We're all not going to be 21 forever, folks. We're going to grow old. Okay? Now, be that as it may, you have to ask yourself, can I wear this? Sure, I can wear it. Well, everyone else is wearing it. Sure, I can wear it. The question is not whether or not you can wear it. It is what identity are you assuming when you wear that. And so you have to look at clothes and say, wait a minute, there's something about alignment here. Okay? So let's talk about this. David didn't have a problem with armor because chapter 17, he says, oh no, I can't wear your armor. Chapter 18, he puts on Jonathan's clothes, a lot more clothes of Jonathan's than what Saul offered him, and he had no objections to wearing that. Do you know why? Because Jonathan's heart was right. Because David was dressing because he was aligning his spirit with the spirit of Jonathan. And if he would have dressed like Saul dressed, he would have become Saul. But when David put on Jonathan's clothes, he became Jonathan. It's not about what you can wear and can't wear. It's about who is this going to make me become. David said, I can deal with this. So David and Jonathan had become extremely close. Their deep affection led to a covenantal bond. Saul would eventually try to kill David. Nevertheless, Saul's son Jonathan and David created a pact of friendship. Although Saul's armor did not suit him, strangely enough, David proudly wore Jonathan's garments. This says more about David's alignment to Jonathan's spirit and Jonathan's heart and attitude than it does about his liking of the garment. Think about that. David looked at this, and this says more about his alignment. His reputation of Saul's armor is not necessarily a repudiation of the skill or quality or craftsmanship of the armor, but rather David in chapter 17 of 1 Samuel is repudiating the spirit, the attitude, the self-indulgence, the presented self-aware, self-actualizing spirit that was behind Saul's armor. And David's refusal to wear Saul's armor, he is distancing himself not from armor. He's distancing himself from the role from which Saul filled his role as king of Israel. David said, if I wear that clothes, I'm going to be viewed as that man. When David came to a meeker, more modest, more self-effacing, more humble man who said, here, take my clothes, David said, sure, I'll wear this because I will assume your identity. The exchange of garments and armor, Cohen writes, has been an assembly part of many covenants. It's been part of the working assembly components of friendships, regal demands, kingly relationships. Classic literature lays this out. For example, in the Iliad, the Greeks and Trojans were poised for battle. Diomedes and Glaucus meet in the no man's land, so to speak. And they eventually decide, we are not going to fight each other. They take a pledge of friendship, and as a sign of this, what do? They exchange their armor. So this is what you have to understand. The thing that they're asking you to wear determines allegiances. Who you are mentally and socially and spiritually aligned with will be demonstrated by the choice of clothing one wears. The issue of clothing has nothing to do with just personal preference. It has everything to do with alignment and authority. In giving them his garment was a sign of loyalty and honor. And from that moment on, when David put on Jonathan's armor and put on Jonathan's clothes, Jonathan submitted himself to David's authority. In fact, not only was he David's confidant, he sometimes even acting against his own father, he also served as David's second in command. You see this in 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 15 through 18. So I want to say plainly that when you come in and there's a community that's desiring you to dress differently, dress ladylike or gentlemanly-like, to dress modest as opposed to immodest, godly as opposed to ungodly, chaste instead of sensual. What is it saying? Kaiser writes in the sociology and psychology of this that at the same time there are strong collective attributes and attitudes that we tend to share and create jointly with others. This will be demonstrated in how one chooses one's clothes. That is to say, quote, because we are subject to many of the same conditions of life. A great many of us experience in our persons similar yearnings, tensions, concerns, and discontents, which regardless of how we apprehend them, we seek some form of expression about them. The way that we dress modestly, gender appropriately, okay? The way that we dress tells you some of the things we're protesting in our world. One of the reasons I dress up is because I'm protesting the shabby, cheap juvenilization of the world we live in. I am a 44-year-old man. I do not want to dress like I'm 16. Okay? I want to dress age appropriate. I want to dress gender appropriate. I want to dress weather appropriately. Okay? One of the first signs of a mental malady is you do not know what to wear appropriate to the weather. That's really a true deal. People who are incapacitated mentally, they do not know how to dress appropriately for weather conditions. They put themselves, and that's why I've always been baffled. Guys, say, well, I wear flip-flops. My identity is I wear flip-flops. Oh, you do? Brilliant. Yep, that's who I am. Really, you're the flip-flop man. Brilliant. I'll make notations. And then in 30-degree weather, 30 below zero weather, they're like, well, that's my identity. I wear flip-flops. Okay, well, you're the flip-flop man. But when uniform comes, there's a time for that. There's a time. So when I'm on the beach, yes, I'm wearing sandals because I want to kick the sand out of my shoes. Kick my feet out of my shoes and put my feet into the sand. I get that. Okay? But when I'm on the floor of a contractor job site, I'm wearing steel toe boots and a hard hat. Why? Because one of the signs of being mentally competent is you know how to dress when and where and appropriate to the occasion which you are. So there are things that you have to be careful that you don't make stands and you don't make concessions and assume identities that neither you nor God should want. And God's will for you is you to dress appropriately and to dress in some way that edifies your lifestyle and communicates to others that I could wear that, but that's not who I am. So I'm not wearing that. Because in wearing that, I will assume that identity. And I have my identity in Jesus Christ. Therefore, I dress age appropriately, gender appropriately, and condition appropriately. Why? Because all of what I wear speaks to who I am. Let's come back next time and we'll talk more about clothing. I'll do maybe one or two more of these, and then I'm going to take a break and talk about a bunch of other stuff that's in my head about communication and other things. And we're putting together some other content. So we'll do this a couple more times, and I'll take a break and I'll pick back up. We've got probably another 10 of these episodes that deal with clothing and what clothing communicates. And I do appreciate your endurance and patience in saying, I'm going to go along with him on this and listen to the whole thing. So appreciate your interest and your open-mindedness. So stay safe and stay happy and stay dressed appropriate to the weather.